All right, what I'm going to do today is, as you probably saw, we're going to be talking about the USS Laffey. And the Laffey has a, I wouldn't call it a name or a nickname, but Laffey is called the ship that would not die. Ship that would not die. The commanding officer of Laffey during the kamikaze attack on the Laffey wrote a book with that title. That's not the only kamikaze book that's ever been written, however. In our own library, this is a show and tell here. We had our librarian Val pull out from our stacks here every book on kamikazes of the Second World War. And you can see, just get a visual. So an incredible amount has been written on kamikazes. But I want to tell the story of this one ship, particularly through the eyes of the men who survived it. The original members of the U.S.S. Laffey Association. The original association was called the U.S.S. Laffey Enshrinement Group. The Navy was getting ready to just do like they always do with an old destroyer, take it out and shoot a harpoon missile at it or fire a submarine torpedo at it. They were getting ready to sink it. And the crew of the wartime Laffey, including the commanding officer who was still alive at the time, they gathered together as a very strong group and they saved the ship from being sunk. Laffey, as you all know, or I hope you all know, is one of our memorial ships that we support. We support 10 destroyers throughout the country. One of them is U.S.S. Laffey, the ship that would not die, in Charleston, South Carolina. So let me start here with this. What's this have to do with the Laffey? I want to talk about the Presidential Unit Citation just for a bit. Does anyone wear the Presidential Unit Citation here? It's very rare, very rare. The only people who can wear, the only sailors who can wear the Presidential Unit Citation are those who served aboard the ship when the ship earned that unit citation. So it's not like, it's very rare. And I'll show you. Let me show you exactly what you have to do. There's going to be a lot of words that I'm going to read to you because there's a lot of quotes that I'm going to use later on. But anyway, the unit must display such gallantry, determination, and esprit de corps in accomplishing its mission under extremely difficult and hazardous conditions so as to set it apart from and above other units participating in the same campaign. Now, below that, in blue, is a continuation. The degree of heroism required to earn the PUC is the same as that which would be required for the award of a Navy Cross to an individual. As you know, Navy Cross is the second highest award for valor. So that's the level, that's what we're talking about. The Presidential Unit Citation is that at that level. This number actually surprised me. I knew we had a lot of destroyers, but tin cans in World War II, 988 destroyers and destroyer escorts served in World War II, 988. As you can see, 425 were destroyers and 563 were destroyer escorts. On our back wall, we have the destroyers and destroyer escorts that were lost. As you can see, there were 98 of them that were lost. 84 destroyers and 14 destroyer escorts. 98, look at the top number. We lost 10% of our destroyers. Our tin cans during the war were sunk. Not just damaged, but sunk. All right, now the next line is, of those 988 tin cans that served in World War II, only 24 were awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. So you can see how rare it was. How rare it was. All right, just keep that in mind here. Okay, let's talk about USS Laffey. Wait a minute. What is that big red word? Sunk. I thought I just said, didn't I just say Laffey is sitting down at the pier in Charleston, South Carolina? Well, yeah, that's the second Laffey. First Laffey was sunk at the First Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. She lies in Iron Bottom Sound right now. This is the first Laffey. Laffey was a Benson-class destroyer. Look at the time lapse between commissioning and sinking. 31 March 42, 13 November 42. 7.5 months from commissioning to on the bottom. Now, a couple things I want you to keep in mind when you look at this. The crew complement, the crew size was 247 men. 247, remember the number. She was a 1,650-ton displacement ship, 347 feet long. The reason I'm asking you to remember these numbers is I'm going to compare them to Laffey number 2. Her speed was 37.5 knots. That's quick, as all of us know. That's quick. Her armament. This is why the Sumter and the Sumner and the Gearing classes came along. Very undergunned. 4 5-inch guns, one mount of 4 guns of 1.1-inch anti-aircraft. 1.1 inch is about 28 millimeters. One mount with 4 guns. The Chicago typewriter, I think they called it. And 5 20 millimeters. And that's it for guns. That's it. No 40 millimeters, that's it. All right. Okay, Laffey. Why was Laffey important? Laffey, in the van of Admiral Callahan's test group of 5 USN cruisers and 8 destroyers, engaged 2 Japanese battleships, 1 cruiser, and 14 destroyers in the first battle of Guadalcanal, first naval battle of Guadalcanal. Laffey was the second ship in this long column going against the jet. This is I think about 1 o'clock in the morning. So it was a night action. Laffey, the entire force got twisted up with the Japanese. Laffey came within 20 feet at full power of hitting the battleship Hiei, who was also at full power. They veered off just in enough time. But in getting that close to the battleship, she took the bridge, the navigation bridge of the battleship under fire. Severely wounded the admiral and killed his chief of staff. It was such a tornado of action that night that the Japanese, even though the Japanese were numerically superior, they called it off and they went away. To come back the next day, but they went away that night. However, Laffey, in the middle of all this, was completely surrounded by 2 battleships and a bunch of destroyers, and she was finally sunk by the intense fire that took her down. Right. Laffey, remember, 247 men in her crew. 59 of them were killed, 116 wounded, and only 72 were rescued, were pulled out of the sea uninjured. And for that, Laffey was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. All right, because of her heroism, they went to the building ways and named the second Laffey, DD-724. She is the ship that would not die. Laffey is a Sumner class, and let's compare. Remember those numbers I asked you to remember. 1,650 tons versus 2,200 tons. 600 tons heavier, displacing 600 tons more. About 30 feet longer. Crew complement, not 247, but 350, another 100 extra men on the crew. But why do you have 100 extra men on the crew? Look at the guns. She had 6 instead of 4 5-inch 38s and 3 mounts. 12 40 millimeter mounts. 12 full 40 millimeter mounts. And those of you who have served on a gun crew of a 40 millimeter, you know how many guys it takes. Instead of 5, there were no 40 millimeter mounts on the Laffey number 1. 20 millimeters, 11 of them as opposed to 5 on the first Laffey. So you can see why they needed 100 extra men, 350 men. She also had 2 sets of torpedoes instead of the 5 that remember, torpedoes back in those days were anti-surface. The whole point of a destroyer division was to what they call div-tacs, division tactics, where they would steam together, all turn together, all shoot torpedoes together. That was a tactic that they constantly, because that was really the main weapon of a destroyer back then, was the torpedo, the surface torpedo, not the anti-submarine but the surface.
Were these both steam?
Pardon me?
Were they both steam?
Oh yes, yes. In fact, good question. The Sumner class, well, JPK, all the destroyers we have, 600-pound plant for you engineers, 600-pound plant, 60,000 horsepower. The first Laffey, same plant, but only 50,000 horsepower. But she got 37 knots out of that 50,000 horsepower. I think a lot of it was when you make something that heavy, an extra 600 tons, you got to push that through the water. And but you can see her speed is the 34 knots. Okay, so that's Laffey. This is what she looked like in December 1944. And you can see that, I picked this one because it's got that great camouflage that she temporarily wore. They call dazzle. If you kind of squint at that, you try to, just imagine you're the lookout on the starboard wing of the bridge and you see that off in the distance. How many ships do you see? You know, which way are they going? How fast are they going? That's why the camouflage is put on there. All right, so that's what she looked like in the Philippine waters in December 44. Let me go back for a second. I'll just show you when she was commissioned. Commissioned 8 February 44. 8 February. So this is only 9 months later. All right, Laffey was directed. This is now the invasion of Okinawa. This very busy slide, the red arrow shows radar picket station number 1, which was the busiest picket station. These were all manned by destroyers. Very few destroyer escorts. They only stuck a destroyer escort out there when they had no other to put out. And the reason for it is no guns. All manned by destroyers. Their purpose was to detect kamikazes coming down to attack the landing fleet. In the center of this big wagon wheel is Point Bolo. That's where most of the invasion force was. And of course the Japanese were trying to kill that invasion. Radar picket station number 1, where Laffey was assigned, is due south of the southern island of the southernmost island in the Japanese chain, only a couple hundred miles away. It was the hottest of the radar picket stations. Note that she was sent there. Initially, she wasn't supposed to go there, but U.S.S. Cass and Young, another of the ships that we support up in Boston. Cass and Young was up there, and they took a kamikaze hit, didn't sink it, but they would damage them. So they took Cass and Young out of position, and they sent the Laffey up there. The post, now, when I said they were the most active, this is what I meant. The post-action briefing, this is that they detailed it after. They said 50 Japanese planes were detected on radar. 50 Japanese in a huge swarm were coming down from the north. The Combat Air Patrol, under the control of Laffey, these were F-6 Hellcats and F-4 Corsairs, Marine Corps Corsairs and Navy Hellcats. They were under the direct control of the Combat Air Patrol was under direct control of Laffey. Laffey sent them up there to intercept and they were able to eliminate, either turn back or shoot down 28 of them. Combat Air Patrol took care of 28 of those 50. However, that meant 22 got through. 22 got through. And for 79 minutes, Laffey endured the attack of 22 kamikazes. She shot down 8 of them. Her own guns shot down 8 kamikazes. 7 of the kamikazes simply missed. The pilot misjudged. He was probably, his heart rate was a little high, I think, at the time that he was probably flying. 7 of them just missed. However, some of them missed, dropped the bomb that hit. So 7 kamikazes actually crashed into Laffey. 7 of them. 7 of them hit during that period of 79 minutes. So average 1 a minute. One every 10 minutes, rather. 4 bombs. Now, some of these kamikazes had bombs, and you'll see the result of one of them. And they would release the bomb at the last second. The bomb would hit, and the kamikaze would hit too. So 4 bombs actually hit Laffey during that mess. The point at the last one is important. All these Japanese aircraft, in their attack, heavily strafed the Laffey, and that was a tactic. It wasn't because you think to yourself, well, how's a 30 caliber round going to hurt the ship? It's not. The 30 caliber round, the strafing, was meant to suppress the anti-aircraft fire, suppress all those open 40 millimeter and 20 millimeter mounts. You had men up there, you had 18-year-old boys up there shooting, and here's a plane coming at you, shooting at you. What's the natural thing is to duck away. So that's why they did it. They just held down the machine gun button on the airplane, and so every single aircraft that came in was heavily strafing the Laffey also. I'm going to show you, there's a very famous Marine artist named Tom Freeman. Some of you may have seen his work. He's very, he took the after-action report from the attack on Laffey, and he created this painting. What you're seeing here is Laffey at full power. You can see this engulfed in flame back at that, and I'm going to show you some of the close-ups of that. But this is very accurate. You can see the 2 streams, 2 fire hoses here, trying to fight the fire. This is the after torpedo mount. This is mount 53. Was completely engulfed in flame right here. These 3 20 millimeter mounts. You've got a 40 millimeter quad 40 right on this side. So you can see what they were up against. They were engulfed in flame. This is accurate. This kamikaze coming in here, kamikaze number 11. He was the 11th one. All right. And all right, I'm going to come back to this. I'll show this one again in a few minutes. This is a piece of paper that went with the captain's after-action report. It was hand-drawn. What you see over here, the captain wrote a book called The Ship That Would Not Die, and this is a cleaned-up version of his hand-drawn. Excuse me. After the action, the captain was summoned to the flagship to report to Admiral Turner what the heck happened, what happened. The captain was busy, as you can imagine, having had his ship towed into Karimareto. So he sent his communications officer, this fellow here, Lieutenant J.G. Manson. He sent his communications officer over there to brief in his stead. But before he went, I'll quote here, "As we talked, the skipper had taken a piece of paper and a pencil and sketched the flight path of each attacking aircraft. After an hour, I stuffed his sketch in my pocket and was off to the flagship." And he briefed then the admiral. He briefed the admiral on what happened. Okay, what happened to Laffey? Laffey survived. 350-man crew, 32 were killed. 71 were wounded, but 247 of them survived. And for her action, she too was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. So of the 24 Presidential Unit Citations awarded to destroyers, to tin cans, during the Second World War, 2 of them were named Laffey. 2 of them, 2 out of 24 named Laffey. Okay, let's look at that. Mount 51, 52, 53, forward torpedo mount, after torpedo mount, 40 millimeter guns here, 20 millimeter here, 20 millimeter back here. This is a picture of Laffey after the action. I'll give you some blow-ups of that here. How many are you familiar with the twin 5-inch 38? All right, gunner's mate, of course. Yeah. All right. Either as a gunner's mate or as a gun crew, either in the magazine, in the upper handling room, in the mount itself. I just want to, you all know this, but I want to point out a couple of things. Notice the word shield. They don't say armor plate, do they? It's shield. This is an open mount, really. It's shielded because of weather. You know, there's not much is going to stop in battle. Not much is going to stop something penetrating that shield, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, that's Mount 53 before. Here's Mount 53 after the action. This most likely is strafing damage. All these. All right, now I'm going to apologize here to you because I'm going to be reading to you a little bit. As I said, all these books tell you what happened. Throughout, you'd have to really search through these books to find a quote from a man who survived it. But I'm going to try to quote some of those now. I was only 18 years old. There was an explosion and I was blown out of the mount, Mount 53. I woke up on the port side hatch to the head. Someone was spraying me with salt water because I was on fire. Burnt all over, I lay in front of a blower from the engine room. The warm air felt soothing on my burns. Merle Johnson, Seaman Second, he was a powderman, left gun on Mount 53. Let me go back to the left gun, Mount 53. Whoa. Here's how he survived. He was blown out of the mount. That's how he survived. Here's a second-class gunner's mate. I hung halfway out of the port side hatch. While the mount was turning, we took a direct hit from the starboard quarter. In all, 6 men died in Mount 53 that day. When I regained consciousness, I was draped over a K gun some 15 feet forward of Mount 3 on the main deck. I found Chester Flint pinned in the starboard hatch by parts of the kamikaze's motor. I tried to free him, but he died in my arms. Larry Delweski, gunner's mate second class, he was the mount captain. Those men were his men. He was the mount captain. All right, remember we looked at that terrible conflagration back aft. The other big hit was forward on the starboard side, right there, right in. And what is you guys, you know, if you've served on these ships, you know, if on a gearing or a Sumner, the wardroom serves as battle dressing. It is so battle dressing station, as you can imagine, in the middle of all this was filling up pretty quickly. Kamikaze hit right at the wardroom. This is an interior look at the wardroom. You can see the cushions from the comfy seat the officers had. That's where it punched through. 2 20 millimeter mounts here. Just to put these two pictures together, this is the basket that did the floats, the flotation, the cork floats. So this is that right there. Here's the aft end of Mount 52. Here's Mount 52. Just to reorient here. Here's the here's the starboard running light. This is the recess for the starboard running light. That's it right there. So the kamikaze hit right there. I made one trip to Mount 21. Mount 21 is that mount right there. 20 millimeter, first one forward on the starboard side. I made one trip to Mount 21 carrying ammo. When a bomb hit close aboard, I heard a voice behind me saying, "Please help me." There stood Fred Burgess on one leg, the other having been completely severed above the knee. I caught him as he collapsed, laid him on the deck, and placed a tourniquet on his leg. We carried him to the wardroom to be cared for. After I came back out, I found Wismer lying on the main deck. I gave him artificial respiration, but soon one of the officers came by and said he was gone. Someone asked me if I could help Zupan. A piece of shrapnel had ripped away part of his shoulder, and someone had to keep pressure on the artery to slow the bleeding. I stayed with him until help came. Second class gunner's mate, Robert I. Carr. He was a Mount 43 is a 40 millimeter mount. All right, this is Cy Simonis, who was the man, by the way, Cy Simonis, one of the things that we have, pardon me for a second, is Cy Simonis' own file. Cy Simonis joined the Navy in 1940. He was a sonarman first class, as you can see on the Laffey. He was the one who formed the Laffey enshrinement group. He's the one who was the spark plug for saving the Laffey. This fellow here, Cy Simonis, passed away in the 1990s. He says, I was up near Mount 52. Remember I pointed out Mount 52 there, right? You all know that. I remember seeing Fred Burgess, we already talked about Fred, with one leg hanging by a piece of flesh. He was pleading for someone to help him. Two of us got him into the wardroom, where Dr. Matthew Darnell placed a tourniquet on his leg. When I saw him later, he was still on the table, dead. Burgess had just turned 18 years old. He was in the Navy because his mom and dad said, you can do it. He was a kiddie cruiser. Let's go back to this. The area we just talked about is right up here. That's where kamikaze hit here. Now, when we talk about after frame 140, okay, just let that sink in for a second. Frame 140 is about here. So what you're going to be seeing here is a discussion of what happened back here. This is a hand-drawn, very roughly hand-drawn version. It was part of the after-action report along with that hand-drawn sketch showing all the different attacks. Okay, what happened, this is a, let me just go, this is a 40 millimeter mount, 20 millimeter torpedo mount, Mount 53, 20 millimeter. Okay, I'm going to read some of these because they're very hard to read. They're handwritten, and it took me a while to decipher them. One suicide without a bomb. This is pointing at the starboard side of Mount 53. One suicide without a bomb. One suicide plane probably with a bomb. So two of them hit here. Landing gear of the plane that hit here, the landing gear hit there. And then it went on to hit the 53. A 250-pound fragmentation bomb hit here. A 250-pound fragmentation bomb hit here. Remember I said there were 4 bombs that hit. So here were 2 of them. The after deck house that supports the torpedo mount was hit by 2 suicide planes, right there, one after the other. And a suicide from the port bow, struck 20 millimeter mounts on the starboard side. The ones that we saw up there, 21 and 23. There's two that were hit up by the wardroom. Tearing off the wing and spreading gasoline over the whole area of the superstructure. So it was the fuel tank in the wing of the kamikaze that hit up forward that spewed all that gasoline, aviation gasoline, over the aft end. And that's that conflagration you saw in the painting. The whole area of superstructure deck holes this whole area of superstructure deck holes inboard of the 40 millimeter mount right here were caused by exploding 40 millimeter ammunition. The fire got so intense there that all the ready service, all the 40 millimeter clips that were in the tub, started cooking off, and penetrating the hull, penetrating the deck. Of course, what that meant is flame went down into the spaces below. So you had terrible fires internally too. So you guys who were part of damage control repair parties, you can just imagine what they were experiencing. Okay, back aft. I was on the nozzle of a 2.5-inch fire hose spraying the mount when another enemy plane started his strafing run on the starboard side. That's the one I showed you in the painting, coming in from the starboard side, number 11. His bullets were hitting the bulkhead by the afterhead. This was plane number 11, which plowed into the starboard side of Mount 53 and killed 6 of the men in the mount and Ensign Jerry Sheets. Chief Torpedoman Wayne Haley was in the secondary con or up on the torpedo tubes. Wasn't quite sure. His clothes were on fire from the flaming gasoline. Someone hit him with a stream of water. You saw that heavy stream of water that was being played on that after end in the painting. And he was saved from burning. He had shrapnel wounds in his legs and eventually had to have them amputated. Sorry. And that's a memory of Cy Simonis. Then we took our first hits from 2 planes coming from the stern. We took our first casualties then too. They systematically wiped out many of our guns, our firepower, and our superstructure. That Lieutenant J.G. Manson is the fellow who ran over to brief the Admiral. I remember Larry Dalewski, captain of Mount 3, rolling me around when my clothes were burning. My hair was burned and my face and my left arm. Bert Remsen, Seaman First Class, coxswain. Laffey took a hit on the port side of the main deck level, just under the cluster of 5 torpedoes. Mount 3 was under control of the bridge and had been firing off to starboard when this hit came. The gasoline-laden wing of the kamikaze caused a terrible fire in this after main deck area, including the back of Mount 3, above the main deck and in the ammunition handling below. So you can imagine you're down in the handling room and you're on fire and you're surrounded by 5-inch. All right, who was the guy? Who was this guy? This is he's wearing the insignia of a rear admiral at this point. At the time, he was a captain. He was a commander, rather. He was the captain of the ship. But he wasn't a new kid. He was Naval Academy class of 1931. Everything up to here, the ones in red are his World War II units. Everything is pre-World War II. 2 battleships, 1 patrol gunboat, USS Guam, and 4 destroyers. So he was a tin can man for sure. When the war started, he was the executive officer of Aaron Ward. If you'll notice, I put a little asterisk as CO. It's because Aaron Ward was also heavily damaged, not by kamikazes, but heavily damaged by Japanese aircraft, but were not kamikaze aircraft. He came, and he was XO at the time. At the time that that happened, the Laffey number 1, was sunk. So this gentleman was the XO of the Aaron Ward. He then came back. He went to Desron 21 as the ops officer, where he earned, the Destroyer Squadron 21 earned the Presidential Unit Citation. And that's why you see Presidential Unit Citation ×2. He earned one for Laffey and one for the Destroyer Squadron. But he came back as the commanding officer of Aaron Ward. And he was a commanding officer for 3 weeks when Aaron Ward was sunk. So he lost his first ship. He then went to Laffey. And you know the story of Laffey. The man went on to the XO of the Manchester, post-war now. Everything in black from then on is post-war. Manchester, where he's XO, he went to the Commodore of Destroyer Division 202, that's why the star's there. Commanding officer of the Glynn, APA 239. I was on APA 212, so I'm familiar with that class. And then commanding officer of the Iowa, the battleship Iowa. He then went on as a flag officer to command Cruiser Destroyer Group, or Division 5, and then he was, when he retired, he was the commander of the Mine Forces Pacific. So he was no slouch. He then came on in retirement. He was brought back by Cy Simonis. Captain, please help us save our ship, and he did. He took a great part in that. This is what they thought of him. Our skipper, Commander Beckton, had fought all over the South Pacific. He was a true hero. The citizens of Hot Springs, Arkansas, Beckton's hometown, would have been proud of him if they knew what he had done in combat. But of course, what he had been doing in combat was not releasable yet. So the hometown people didn't know. They just knew he was in the Navy, that's all. Our captain, F. Julian Beckton, was one of the finest men I've had the privilege of serving. Competent, strong, fair, considerate, and inspirational. Second-class quartermaster. And that's a man, second-class quartermaster, who spent much of his time shoulder to shoulder with the captain. So that carries some weight. Most quartermasters do have a good opinion of people. There he is back there. Looking back, Admiral Beckton did an outstanding job, and I don't think any other skipper could have done any better. Those of us who survived are a direct result of Admiral Beckton's leadership. That's from a Seaman First Class. All right, well, where's Laffey now? Here she is. Patriots Point Naval and Maritime Museum in Charleston, South. How many have been down to see Laffey? Okay, 1, 2, 4. So, there's Laffey. What you see back here is an aircraft carrier, of course. Yorktown, right? Yorktown, yeah. Well, Laffey had kind of a tough row after, even though they saved her back in the 1970s, they saved her. She soon went through the same problems that so many of the museum destroyers are having today. That's their hull. Hull that, of course, one of the reasons they call them tin cans, they're thin to start out with. And the ravages of time, you can see this is just wasted completely away. All right, well, they almost lost Laffey, and they almost, thank God for the state of South Carolina, stepped in with a bunch of money. And they put Laffey into dry dock. And they said, what do we do? Do we start repairing that hole, and that hole, and that hole, and that hole? They said, no, no. Those of you who've worked in a shipyard or been around the shipyard, you know that the biggest cost is manpower, labor. So they said, strip the hull off the ship, and that's what they did. This is all new work going back on. You can see nice new, but they stripped everything off the ship, and they completely replated it. Now these ships have about somewhere around 100 through hull protrusions. You know, the obvious ones, the scoop injection for the main condensers, but you had injections and overboards for all sorts of stuff, 100 of them. They didn't have to worry about that. So they didn't have to recreate all of the suctions and discharges and all that because it was a museum ship. So she basically has a smooth hull all around. And some more pictures of that. Look at their props. Cut the bottom, cut one of the blades right off it. All right, so I just wanted you to take a look at what, and now we had a very small part in that because we support, the Laffey is one of the 10 ships that we support. When you realize what it costs, the millions of dollars that it costs to do that, you know, we were a very small part of that, but we were a part of it. And that's the story of the Laffey. Okay. Any questions? Yes, Bob.
How many destroyers were lost to kamikaze? Was it like 180 or something like that?
I don't know. No, there were only 98 destroyers lost total. There were an incredible number were hit by kamikazes.
Yeah.
I don't know how many that is though. But there's a number of things I didn't put in this because of just time. There's a comment by, I'm sorry, my throat's getting me. There's a comment by this comm officer, Lieutenant J.G. When they came into Karama-Rito the first time, before they went up to he said, it was like coming into a graveyard of ships. The harbor, it was a protected harbor where they would tow these ships in when they were hit out on these radar picket stations. Let me go all the way back here. Ships that were hit out on the radar picket stations. By the way, it wasn't just one ship. There was invariably a small amphibious ship out there. They were about 150 feet long, heavy with 20 millimeter and 40 millimeter guns. But they worked together. I don't know if you noticed on the hand-drawn sketch later on, you saw another ship down there, close to that. I'll go back and show you. Well, there were two ships out on every one of those radar picket stations when they manned them. A destroyer and a smaller ship, heavy with guns. When they were hit, down in Karama-Rito, which is this Point Bolo that you see in the middle of that, wagon wheel there. Down at Point Bolo, they had a number of ocean-going tugs ready to go and lit off and ready to go. As soon as one got hit, they would haul butt out there, pick them up, and try to tow them in. A number of ships, you can read about this, there's so much written about them. A number of ships just didn't make it. Some of them had to be cut loose because they were going down. But they tried to recover every one that they could. And this Lieutenant Manson, his comment when they went into Karama-Rito the first time, before they were ever sent to the radar picket station, he said it was like going into a graveyard because there was nothing but ships with ships like you saw Laffey. Well, Laffey spent some time there. One of those hits, by the way, she was at left full rudder at the time, trying to avoid, and one of those hits back aft jammed her rudder at 27 degrees left, which is just 3 short of left full. So you can imagine how hard it was to maneuver in anything other than a circle. For you engineers, it was port engine ahead, flank, starboard engine back, you know, just to work it around. And it wasn't until a couple days later, after they were towed back into Karama-Rito, that they were able to unfree the rudder. And the whole story of Laffey getting back to the United States is an interesting one. I didn't go into it here because it's a long story. They had a number of occasions where they almost didn't make it, where they had to go into Guam, they had to go into Pearl Harbor, and they almost didn't make it to Seattle. When they came to Seattle, they had been their reputation preceded them. And the Navy decided to, even though it was late in the war, they were having trouble getting ships out of Todd Seattle, Todd Shipbuilding. Things were slowing down. They weren't able to get the right kind of people in there to work. So they were trying to raise another, 10,000 men to come in and work in that shipyard. And people weren't responding. So they took Laffey in her condition, without doing anything to her, and put her at a public pier in Seattle for 1 week. And they opened the doors and they say, you people come down and see what your boys are doing. And they did. 90,000 people went through the Laffey in 1 week. And they were given a guided tour, and the Navy told them, hold nothing back. Hold nothing back. Took them into the burnout compartments, into the Mount 53 blown out. In fact, there are pictures, I don't have them here, but there are pictures of what they did in Seattle. They actually put signs up all around pointing out the damage. They wanted people to see that the war was still going on. There was a feeling in the United States at that time, this is late in 1945, right? Late in 1945. It wasn't long after that, this is April of 45, but it wasn't long after that we took Okinawa, and we were getting ready to go to attack Japan, to invade Japan, and the atom bomb brought an end to that. But throughout the United States, there was a feeling that, okay, this is just about over, we can relax. No, the Navy wanted to show the people that your boys are still out there getting their butts kicked, and that's what they did here. But I don't know, Bob, how many I'll find out and let you know. Somewhere in this is a
I
dead
just
number.
dug it up.
Pardon me?
14 destroyers were sunk by kamikazes for the Allies. Some British, U.S. Over 70 were damaged.
Okay. Well, one thing to remember that I'm just talking about destroyers, tin cans here. Many ships were sunk that were not destroyers and tin cans.
Oh, 100.
100. Is that what you? Okay, Bob. There's a good answer. 100. About 100. But they weren't all destroyers. You had LSTs that were sunk. You had.
And this says 14 destroyers were sunk.
How many?
14 were
14. 14 destroyers were sunk by kamikazes.
But the Japanese didn't use kamikazes until towards the
sunk.
end.
October 44.
Really the first one I think hit in the Philippines. It was down in the
St.
Philippines.
Louis, she was
Yeah.
the first ship sunk by a kamikaze.
I think you initially had individuals that chose to be kamikazes.
Yeah, that
You
was from the
Yeah,
off.
but when the Japanese realized, this is my opinion now, when the Japanese realized that that could cause a lot of damage, you started forming kamikaze units and pulling aircraft in specifically to be kamikazes. Yes, Jim?
I don't know if you mentioned it or not about the Cassin Young. Lost the forward fire room, did you mention that?
Yes.
No.
Well, I didn't mention the forward fire room, but the Cassin Young was actually hit twice. The reason, as you can see, the reason that Laffey was sent up to there in the first place is the Cassin Young was hit.
You lost everybody in the forward fire room.
Yeah.
And then, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
The Cassin Young, Captain Cassin Young, was captain of the repair ship Vestal that was tied up next to the Arizona when it blew up.
Yeah.
And he had that seaman cut the lines to separate the two ships.
Yeah. But Cassin Young is a good point you bring up. Cassin Young was actually hit twice by kamikazes. She was repaired. Her damage, I won't say it was small. She lost I think the first time she lost 11 men in the first attack, so it was not an inconsequential attack. But mechanically it was. They got her back out. And then she was hit again. Second time she was hit, believe it or not, it was a biplane, an old ramshackle wood and fabric and wire trainer that came out. And the Japanese used a number of them very late in the war because they couldn't be seen on radar. It was just wood. It was just a wooden, and they would get in very, very close before they could actually were taken. And that's that's the one that took out the fire room that Jerry was just talking about. Yes, sir.
I read one of those books, I don't know which one, but from the minute I picked it up, I couldn't put it down.
Yeah,
So interesting and
yeah.
really made you get involved in the book.
Sure. If you can get a hold of Captain Becton's book, that's the title of it, The Ship That Would Not Die, by F. Julian Becton. And it's, you can probably get it on Amazon. We have a copy of it here. But incredible, and it's told by the captain, so it's not secondhand. It's not secondhand information. And he lays it all out, Yes, Dave?
Well, I just want to note that we have all these handwritten notes from the people that were there.
Yes.
And for you to go through all the time of research to read all these
Yep.
handwritten notes, to be able to get it documented, it's a
Absolutely.
big effort, and appreciate you doing it.
Yeah. What Dave is talking about is, this is an advertisement for our library, which is the library that's supported by you, and not only just supported because of your dues, but it's also supported by stuff that you and guys like you have donated to our library. And this is Cy Simonis, there's his name right on the bottom. That's his personal record of saving the Laffey. And in it, he has handwritten memories of it. You don't find this anywhere else. You won't find this in the Naval War College Library or University of Rhode Island. You won't find it because it's handwritten. It's right here. So we're trying to let the academic world know. If you're writing another, do we need another book on kamikazes? Maybe, but we got a bunch. But if you're writing another one, you could come to this room right here, sit here for a week or two, and never go out here other than to use the head. And you can do all your research right here, including research of what's first person accounts of it right here, still handwritten. So, good point. And that's why I apologize after the fact for reading to you. I know it's terrible to have people read to you, but I wanted you to hear in their words what happened. You can read that this happened and this happened, but when you hear a man say that they laid me down by the blower from the after engine room and the heat from the blower soothed my burns, you don't get it much more personal than that. Yeah. Yes, Tom?
Yeah, I just looked up how many ships were actually sunk. It said around 350 vessels were hit and 47 were sunk.
How many?
Around 350 were hit.
Yeah.
47 were sunk.
47? That's all? Oh. 357 were hit by kamikazes, and 47 were put on the bottom. That seems a small number. Okay. Hey. Tom, so it's Tom, Jim, and Jim. All right, who wants to go first? You're standing up, Jim, so you're on. All right.
This is going to be about romance. We were the first Navy ship in Ponce, Puerto Rico since the World War. And we went into Ponce just to recover from a bad storm. And we somehow they decided we'd stay there for 3 weeks, which was great for the crew because it was a beautiful area. So we were accepted as all the men, everybody on the ship was invited into the private homes in Ponce, Puerto Rico. And of course, Don Q rum, everybody drank only Don Q rum. That was their big thing. Well, I was an officer, and the wife of the owner of Don Q, which is now Bacardi, they bought Bacardi out. And in the High Spanish, they were High Spanish, not like the rest of Puerto Ricans. And the tradition among the High Spanish is the mother decides who her daughter marries. So we were all in the wardroom, and the mother came by and lined us all up and picked me. She picked me to be her house guest, and I didn't think much of that, you know. So I go to the place. It's a fantastic mansion with a pool in the middle. Her daughter had just graduated from a top finishing school in Switzerland. Beautiful, beautiful blonde. And the mother's decided I'm going to marry her. So she talked to me for a couple hours and said, "You're going to marry my daughter?" I said, "I'm already engaged to my wife in upstate New York." She says, "We'll break the engagement." You know, she says, "I want you to be my daughter's husband." Well, she was just absolutely beautiful. But that's where I made a decision. If I had made that decision, I would be a multi-billionaire. But my decision was not that, because I had taken my wife to her first prom when she was 13. Gone to school with her, and all through, we were like brother and sister, and I felt I wanted a family at the time, and I wanted her to be the mother of my children. So I turned them down. So they eventually bought Bacardi, which you see in all the bars, and she ended up to be the top model in Puerto Rico. So I just tell you that story. You have to make, I've lost my wife since, after 65 years, but those decisions you had to make. And the only reason I got out of the Navy was because it was not something for a married man following the carriers. We always operated with the carriers, and they were always at sea 6 to 7 months. Well, that's not, I decided, a second decision, I was enlisted before I got commissioned, and I decided that marriage was more important than family. I loved the Navy. I loved every minute of it. But you have to make a decision, like, I decided not to be a millionaire. I decided not to stay in the Navy, but I was in 14 years active and reserve.
Good. All right, Jim followed by Jim.
The first ship I was on was right out of boot camp, was an AKS, a floating ship store. 3 days into my duty at sea, they sent me mess cooking. Well, I'm mess cooking, and the chief stew burner comes up to me one night and says, "Kerry, take this tray up to the bridge for the officer to sample a meal." I said, "Chief, I don't even know where the bridge is." So he told me how to get there, and I went up there, and I climb up the ladder with the tray, and I step onto the bridge, and I can't see a damn thing. All right, I tripped over somebody's phone wire, bumped into somebody, and the two of us went down with the tray. And as he gets up, in white letters on the back of his jacket, it says "Captain." So he turns to me and he says, "Sailor, what's your name?" I said, "Kerry, sir." He says, "How long you been aboard?" I said, 3 days, sir. He said, "Where were you before that?" I said, "Boot camp, sir." He says, "Get a swab, get a bucket, get this cleaned up." So I did, and I'm up there for about 45 minutes. I get back down to the galley, and this chief says to me, "Kerry, where the hell have you been?" I said, "Sir, I had a little problem up on the bridge." And I told him, and he started to laugh. So I said, "I'm never going up there again." So a couple days later, he comes to me in the morning and says, "Kerry, take this tray up to the bridge." I said, "Chief, I'm not going up there." I said, "You know what?" He said, "Kerry, it's daylight. You can see up there." So we're crossing the North Atlantic in a hurricane. And I get to the bridge, and I get to the ladder going to the bridge, which goes from starboard to port. And as I'm going up, the ship's rolling, and I've got the tray, and you go to take a step, and it's way up here, and the next one is way down here, and I'm having trouble. Well, it took a roll, and the tray went over my shoulder. I went down backwards. Guess who's coming up behind me? The old man. He says, "Let me guess. Your name's Kerry." "Yes, sir." He says, "Kerry, what did they tell you in boot camp was the worst hazard aboard ship? I said, fire, sir. He says, you're correct. Most ships, that's true. On this ship, you are the worst hazard I've ever seen. He says, you know what the deal is? Get a bucket and get a swab and get out of my way.
Well, gentlemen, so many sea stories, so little time. Yeah, I'm wearing a submarine. I built them in U.S.S. Massachusetts, so please don't hold it against me. Sea stories, many stories on the Miller. How many here have performed destroyer operations as a submarine in heavy seas? Yeah, on the Knox class, I was on the Miller. I was a seaman then. I started out and I struck into the grade of gunner's mate. I was up on forward lookout. We didn't have port and starboard. We just had fore and aft because we were a reserve ship, minimum manned. And we were running a hurricane off the Azores. It was about the same time frame, 87. And getting up there, we're going through the storm and we're taking waves up on the bridge. And then it got to the point where we're taking them up over and almost completely submerged. And I had to go up and relieve the forward lookout. So up to the flying bridge, up there, center line, hooked up. And for God knows some reason, we didn't have any safety harnesses on. We should have, the amount of water we'd taken. So getting up there and then seeing the stuff like you see in the movie The Perfect Storm, cutting through that stuff. And every time I see stories like that, I sit and I laugh. And my wife says, why are you laughing? Common day-to-day operations on a destroyer. Are you kidding me? This is fun. And like she's like, what? Oh yeah. Part submarine. That's a destroyer. And even though a frigate, destroyer, escort, same thing. We started out as that. And when I got up there and hanging on, it's like the guy on the JL board. Guys, remember that? Calling off the stuff from combat for the captain. Well, he's on the headphones. He says, you could feel it. You didn't have to tell us. He said, forward lookout, bridge, duck. Yeah. And then you look up. Has anyone been to Niagara Falls, gone into tunnels and watched all that water come down? Same perspective. And you see everything behind you underwater. And you're just holding on, waiting. Stop, look up. The longest 1 hour watch before I rotated I ever had, and just duck. It wasn't just a game. Survival of the fittest, and how many tons of water can you see? So brings back memories and fun stuff. So life on the Miller.
Okay, one thing we didn't do, usually usually the Sea Story competition is run by our good friend Jeff, and who is not here today. And we forgot to pass out the little pieces of paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, we're going in order. Jim, you're number 1, right? I hate to say this to you, Jim, but Jim, you're number 2. And Tom, you're number 3. All right. What I'm going to do is to keep, we don't want to make any enemies here, so I'm going to ask the 3, number 1, number 2, and number 3 to simply close their eyes. All right? Close your eyes. You be the counter, Tony. All right? Everybody close your eyes now. Number 1. Number 2. Number 3. All right, you guys can open your eyes now. By acclamation, I guess? Almost. No, not really. It was Number two. Number 2. Jim. Anyway, give him a hand.